Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest session of the Legal Modern Workplace webinar series. We're down to start at 12 o'clock, but just going to give everybody a minute to join, and an opportunity for us three that are on this webinar just to stare into our cameras, uncertain what faces to pull. So yeah, just we're going to give everybody a minute to join. So bear with us for a minute or so. Hello, everyone. Just giving everybody a minute to join. So we're going to start at 12:01. Just give everybody an opportunity to join on. Okay. Okay. Let's get started then. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Legal Modern Workplace webinar series from us at Nexion. The session today is on Goodbye Citrix, Hello Microsoft 365. Now, for those of you that are joined, maybe aren't using Citrix, this is really, I should have called it Goodbye Virtual Desktop, Hello Microsoft 365. But with Citrix being the most prevalent technology used in the legal sector to deliver virtual desktops, I thought it was a bit more of a catchier name. So yeah, so this is the latest episode. This is the third session out of I think seven, where we're going to take the attendees on a bit of a journey exploring what we've termed the legal modern workplace. And today, yes, being around virtual desktop, but if we go on to the next slide, Ben, we can have a look at the wheel that is the legal modern workplace that we've put together and sits at the heart of a white paper that we released towards the end of January, early February. And what that wheel in front of you tries to depict is the key pillars from a technical point of view of tooling that we feel the modern workplace, the modern law firm requires to be able to deliver a legal modern workplace primarily focused at their internal teams, but also that facilitates external services, external digital services, and interactions with their client. So, therefore, an enhanced customer journey. So, of the sessions so far, the first session we had a great conversation with Derek Southall and Nigel Stott around the kind of the big picture as to what's happening across law firms in the UK when it comes to tech strategy, exploring some of the challenges and answer the question whether it was time to move forward and time to modernize. And then in the second session, we explored what we believe is probably the door opener to a more modernized strategy, which is a modern case and practice management strategy. So that pillar there at the top. And we chatted with Phil from Exizent and Oliver from Action Step around what a modern practice management platform looks like and the challenges and opportunities that it brings in terms of plugging in some specialist tools. And that whole question of whether it is best of breed being the best strategy for law firms, or whether sitting within a larger consolidators walled garden with their personally owned their legal tools was the best strategy for law firms. So today we're moving around and we're kind of looking at that wheel. We're touching upon a few of the different segments today. Security and mobility is going to be relevant to today. Productivity is going to be relevant today, and also collaboration, because we're going to be talking about how do we affect the IT user's experience and the drive and the desire to move away from legacy IT design built around virtual desktops to a more modern Microsoft Modern Workplace feel that hopefully facilitates better utilization of the Microsoft 365 software stack. So joining me to talk today, we've got two great guests that actually come from very different angles when it comes to helping modernize the IT user experience. Sorry, you can go back actually, Ben. I've skipped ahead of a slide. So just to talk about how we're going to explore that today, we've got a loose agenda that we're going to follow, where we're going to look to talk about, what was the drive initially towards the utilization of virtual desktops? What problems was it solving back in the day of law firms having on-prem equipment? What challenges now we're facing law firms that use virtual desktops. So explore that a little bit. What a modern strategy could look like. So what's the alternative, and how does that leverage Microsoft 365 tooling? And then to finish off with, where should law firms start if they're looking to maybe modernize their IT strategy and their user experience? So yeah, so joining me on this discussion, we've got two people coming from very different angles. So we've got the fantastic Josh Foy with a fantastic beard. So he works at a Microsoft distributor called Pax8, and he's an absolute guru when it comes to leveraging that Microsoft 365 software package, getting the most of it, and giving the absolute fantastic user experience that lawyers desire and require. Josh works with IT suppliers such as ourselves and organisations to be able to plot a path that's parallel with Microsoft's own strategy. And then we've got David Jackson, CTO of Doyle Clayton, and been within the legal industry for now 25 years plus, maybe, or just about 25 years from doing the math. And myself and David have previously talked about how why does he look so fantastic despite being in legal for 25 years? So something in the water around where he lives. But yeah, so across to David was within a previous law firm for 22 years, and then has been with the fantastic Doyle Clayton since early 2024, a circa 100 employee law firm focused on employment primarily, operated across London, Reading, and Bristol.
Bristol.
Bristol. There we go, David. So yeah, cool. So we're going to have a conversation, explore this agenda, and go from there. So if we could get started, then. So to kick things off, just starting with yourself, David, just to kind of set the scene as to where this journey started. When in your previous firm, when you first moved to a virtual desktop solution away from on-premise, what problems were you trying to solve at that point?
I think for us it was that natural kind of aging infrastructure, aging kit, servers and things like that reaching the end of their natural kind of life. And I think for any business that then puts you at a crossroads potentially, as to which way you want to, what path you take. So do you simply replace it, upgrade it with new kit, and then obviously you get X number of years, out of that kit? Or do you think should we actually go down a different pathway here? Should we look at something else? And so for us, virtual desktops, Citrix, that felt like a natural kind of progression, and the right thing for us to do. Because nobody really wants to be having IT infrastructure on-prem anymore. You didn't want that. There's a lot of risk attached to that. And actually, it needs a skill set as well of people that can maintain that kit and things like that. And as we've seen, I think as years have gone on, that skill set has kind of changed in business and things like that for what's actually required. So for us, it was very much that kind of crossroads of aging kit. What do we do? What pathway do we take? And actually, it was also around the business critical applications that we were using at the time. They needed that kind of legacy kind of infrastructure. We still needed to access like a SQL database. So we kind of needed to give users the same sort of experience that they were used to. And so virtual desktops just seemed a natural progression for us and the right thing to do.
What year do you think that was approximately?
That probably was around about 20, I want to say 20. Oh, I don't know actually. Was it 2020 probably? It was probably,
Yeah.
yeah, probably around
Yeah.
about then.
So a huge increase in hybrid work and becoming
Yeah,
even more so. From recollection, I think you were a single site firm, but I presume there was a lot of hybrid working and remote working
correct.
happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that was key for us, obviously, to be able to, for people to be able to remotely work and things like that. And so, yeah, VDI just kind of lent itself to making that a little bit easier for us to kind of manage and deal with.
And Josh, what benefits, we hinted upon it, and it's, you know, we don't have to spend too much time on this because everybody has been on this journey and obviously is aware that the answer of this was primarily about that remote working, hybrid working, but also there was elements of security. From your point of view, what benefits did VDI give law firms and other businesses at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just building on what you were saying there, David, virtual desktops keep that security perimeter. So we had this sudden move from going from very on-prem working, people sat in an office, where it's so easy for us to go and control, what devices they are on, what network they are on, the physical security of the office. And then all of a sudden there was this overnight shift to great, let's, drag everyone out of the office, throw them back at their homes. Um, but certainly in these sort of heavily regulated industries, there's that requirement to say people still need to be able to access that practice management system. Um, I think, like you said earlier, Matt, a lot of those systems are hosted on SQL databases. They need that really sort of close client server proximity. And so VDI was a really easy way of doing that. So, it lifted and shifted the way that people were working rather than needing that transformation around the applications at that point in time. The PMS, the CMS, they carried on working as they were. But a lot of the way that the people were accessing them, that was the thing that was easy to change, taking them from network devices in the environment, putting them onto VDI, managing those in a slightly different way, but maintaining that security perimeter.
And from my point of view, I mean, for those that don't know my background, so I was the co-founder of VDI, virtual desktop focused provider in the legal sector from 2009 to 2021. I remember our early virtual desktop solutions and the reasons for them. Our first client that we provided that to, shout out to Thompson and Banks in Gloucestershire, a partner for Windows user that had just taken on the first kind of modern equivalent of Ticket Partner for Windows as a practice management system, operating over 4 sites: Pershore, Gloucester, Cheltenham, Tewkesbury. And at the time, they were operating with 4 separate IT setups, realistically. So, 4 instances of their practice management database. And they were operating as separate businesses. So, no economies of scale, of sharing resources. No, clients were struggling to be able to go into different sites but have the same experience because the servers couldn't really replicate fast enough between them. So we did our first virtual desktop solution there. And virtual desktop takes very many forms. At that point, it was a case of they invested in equipment that we hosted for them. Obviously, by the time that we exited that business in 2021, it was somewhat multi-tenanted across, a huge estate of infrastructure. But for them, it was revolutionary at that time because suddenly the business was truly operating as one across those 4 sites, and partners could move across those 4 sites and still have that same user experience. So it was revolutionary at that time. But then as time's come on, for myself on the vendor side of things, challenges started to come about. Managing all these different estates across multiple clients. For yourself, David, looking back to that previous firm, what were the frustrations that started developing from a virtual desktop point of view, both from yourself as the CTO, but also from a user point of view as well?
Yeah, I think it was interesting really because it was because you're kind of all logging into the same environment. Behind the scenes, for the IT and the techies, we're aware really of there being a single point of failure now where we're kind of all logging into. So if there is a problem in the back end somewhere, then everybody's probably going to feel it, in some shape or other. And then equally, obviously, you had applications that people were running inside of the virtual desktop that would just crash, and whether they were running in a virtual desktop or locally, they would crash. However, the difference is because everything kind of ran through Citrix. Citrix developed a bit of a name for itself in terms of it being a cause of problems, whether they were problems related to Citrix or not. It was always, an application crashes, it's Citrix. Something, breaks, it's Citrix. And so that kind of led to that sort of bad sort of feeling, I think, around it, and so then what you're trying to do is you're trying to then overcompensate probably for issues that are not necessarily Citrix related, but you start maybe pumping a little bit more resources at it. So you start to give users a bit more kind of capacity on the servers and things like that. So just because you don't want them to have maybe some issues that they may have around performance and things like that, just because you're simply overcompensating. Equally, we had issues. I mean, when we think of 2020, obviously that was when, the likes of Teams and things like that really sort of started to take off and things like that. And obviously Zoom And so what we found was that the experience inside of a virtual desktop for those applications wasn't the best. And so users were then having to kind of minimize out of Citrix to then do a Teams call and things like that. And it just led to this kind of fragmented kind of day that you'd have really. So yeah, it just didn't work out very well in that sense. And then also troubleshooting became more of a challenge really for us because, you know, you're now having to troubleshoot either a Citrix issue, maybe it's an application inside Citrix, maybe it's an application that's running inside of Citrix that just doesn't like to be in Citrix. It prefers to be, you know, native on a device. And so you then create, you know, maybe longer sort of ticket times for things to be resolved and things like that. So the challenges kind of can snowball and escalate and almost overlap over each other without their without there necessarily being a direct correlation between them. But from a user's perspective, it was Citrix, you know, it was just that was the problem.
Josh, you're at the heart of the IT services industry, so all this seems familiar to you because obviously, you know, there's loads of IT super providers, you know, supporting Citrix environments and virtual desktop environments, and it's worth pointing out that we probably should talk about virtual desktop. I mean, our journey, my own journey when it comes to virtual desktop, we started off with shared server access. So you'd have a shared remote server, terminal server, Zen app server, whatever you may call it, that everybody logs on. That was the first phase of it. And but the challenge with that is that if you know everybody would have it, if one person had an issue, everybody had an issue. There was a fight
Mm.
for compute resource. We then moved to a VDI, a dedicated virtual desktop for each user, which was a huge leap forward, but also came with other challenges of managing that golden image and in terms of the resource usage as well. From your point of view, Josh, what do you see out there in terms of the challenges with using VDI and virtual desktops?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the sort of technical challenges or a lot of the user challenges really come down to like two key issues. A lot of the time it's network, a lot of the time it's the compute itself. Um, so, you know, if we start with network, as an IT person, it's horrible having to pick up the phone and you've got somebody on the other end whose environment isn't working for them. You know, they're not able to do their job, they're feeling that frustration, they're feeling that pain. But there's so much of that that's outside of your control. And if we think of a remote desktop environment, that's a constant stream of data going back and forth from their home network to the VDI, from the VDI to the applications they're using. And there's a large chunk of that that we just don't manage. Um, if we look at how other applications work, you know, they're absolutely, you might have some really heavy data applications. If I'm streaming a video on YouTube, hey, that's a very similar sort of, you know, I'm streaming a video like streaming a desktop. They look and feel quite similar. But actually, with YouTube, it can go and buffer. It's not having to worry about the video catching up with my clicks. And so a network issue there really impacts a user. You know, the experience just isn't fantastic. And, you know, David, you touched on the sort of cost pressures, you know, having to spec that VDI machine to the right level. I think it's something we're really bad at doing. It's particularly challenging when you're sat there with a list of questions about, you know, what are the applications you're using, what system resources do they require, how many of those applications do you need to have open at the same time, you know, how do users actually work? Do they have the practice management system open at the same time they've got Outlook open, some web browsers, different things happening? It's really difficult for us to say, you know, what's a light user, what's a medium user, what's a heavy user. And we do tend to then underspec. You know, we tend to go, actually, the costs are looking a bit scary, the numbers are looking a bit high. Let's not throw as much compute at those users. Let's reduce the resources in a sort of cost saving attempt, whilst then having that negative impact on how users are using that. Um, you know, things like Teams is a particular challenge where you've got, you know, an application that actually is relatively resource intensive on the compute side. It's resource intensive on the network side. And a lot of these modern applications were never designed to work on sort of multi-user desktops where you've got 10 users logging into the same host. So you've got sort of like application architecture issues, you've got compute issues, you've got network issues. And so we see those user frustrations and we can explain them from a technical perspective. And there's certainly point solutions that we can put in place to help mitigate some of those. There's advice that we can give to users, but a lot of it changes the way they work compared to, you know, opening a laptop and using an end user device.
is that David? You said something fantastic. You said the word fragmented user experience, and that's a great explanation, description of what the user experience can be like when you're reliant on virtual desktop. Obviously, you pointed towards the drive towards using Teams, obviously within COVID, that the quickest rolled out application globally or whatever the stats are. But yes, suddenly there was a fragmented user experience where you've got a window open for your legacy practice management system. Okay, I need to do that, but then I want to jump on a video call to a colleague to discuss something that's in a different video window, and then it's a case of, well, okay, well, now I want to share my screen to, and this is all at a time. I don't know whether you agree with this, where the expectations from a user point of view have maybe never been higher, because we all now live in Apple's world where everything's very seamless. Everything's instantaneous. We get things delivered from Amazon the next day. Everything's instantaneous and seamless in terms of your interaction from a digital point of view. And just at that point, we're users go from their home life, when that's the case, then they go into their corporate life, and it's quite a fragmented user experience. Is that the kind of feeling that you get from your user base at times, or historically?
Yeah, I think it, yeah, historically it would have been because, as you say, in everyday life, everything is seamless or made easy. I can open my phone or my iPad and I can just instantly stream that to my TV, and it just works. It just, it all works. But at the same time, okay, so as easy it is for me to share my phone or my iPad, to a TV, as you just said there, Matt, I struggle to then share a presentation or share something on my screen with someone because I've got this fragmented windows of, and then I'm then having to rescale and resize things just to get things to kind of fit on, because obviously what's in the VDI environment works at a slightly different resolution to kind of natively and things like that. So it all just gets a little bit more technical and complicated for users. And then you find, if you're, for support desks and support teams, you're actually hand-holding users on very basic things that should work, rather than, actually getting some real, I think some business wins, and actually driving the business forward.
So you talked about service desk from an IT service point of view. What's known as well is, in Citrix environments, it's a average number of support tickets per user. So you're looking at probably about 1.6 support tickets per user being raised when they're utilizing a Citrix environment, because a lot of those queries will be about performance and speed. Whereas, we're going to go on to talk about what maybe a modern IT strategy looks like. And certainly we see maybe as little as zero point 0.6 support tickets per user being raised every month. I just want to talk about that problem management piece, because I've still got PTSD from trying to support lots of law firms using virtual desktop when COVID struck. And the big challenge that we saw was that you've gone from what happened with COVID, and obviously has continued to happen with hybrid working, is historically that your previous firm, when we talked about that single site on prem. Well, at that point, everybody was in the office. You could floor walk to test the temperature of what the issues are. When you had an issue, you could say, well, it's not connectivity because everybody's connecting fine. Suddenly we've moved to the point where, instead of controlling one environment, you're controlling maybe 100 environments with people working from home. And you've got to identify, from a problem management point of view, when somebody phones and says, hey, it's Citrix, that catch-all phrase that you talked about, David, you've got to identify quickly, well, is it Citrix, or is it the home environment? Is it after 3:30 and the kids are at home and streaming Netflix and so on and so forth? Suddenly you've got so many more factors to consider. And especially in legal, where we've seen law firms with maybe up to 15, 16 plugins into Outlook. And once again, when the phone rings and we've got a Citrix problem, is it a Citrix problem? Is it a plugin problem? Is it an environmental problem? So from a problem management point of view, from an IT service, on the IT service side, the level of complexity increases the amount of time it takes to resolve an issue. Do you see that? Have you seen that in the past?
Yeah,
Sorry, David, that's a
absolutely.
question for you. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's yeah, the whole problem management piece it just becomes really complex, really difficult. And ironically, if you've got on-prem kit though, and all your users are on-prem, obviously no one's working remotely. If, as does happen from time to time, if you're working in central London and you've got some digging going on outside your road, and there's people chopping through cables and they chop through your internet cable, ironically, you can still stay working if you've got your BMS kind of all present with you. But that's not really a decent strategy to kind of rely upon. But yeah, for problem management, it's the complexity. It just becomes really, really difficult to pinpoint and to iron out. And actually, it just leads to longer times as well, just to resolve things and fix things. And then, you're reliant upon a really complex kind of series of systems and platforms and the integrations with them, that actually then the people that maybe you need help from, the people that have actually maybe set it up for you, assisted with that, you need their skill sets when things go wrong, and they might not necessarily always be available as well, because it's now no longer just a help desk issue, sort of that first, second line. We now need to really raise this up. And it gets more and more of a challenge. It really, really does. And so things can really snowball and escalate. And if you're a law firm, and people are not able to work, that's money that your firm is losing because they're not able to deal with client work.
100%. As you said, it's everybody off at the same time. Well, leaving
Yeah.
to one side the PTSD then of challenges that have come before us, because luckily we're both in a different world now where we're dealing with a lot more simplicity. Josh, can you give us a as much of a layman's terms, initially what an alternative experience looks like? What is a modern IT strategy when it comes to delivering applications and giving access to users?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we sort of start with that end user experience, that's what we're focusing our modern IT strategies around. We're starting with the how are users accessing their devices, how are they accessing data, how are they accessing their applications, how do they want to work? And you're absolutely right. The expectations of users has absolutely jumped up from, I'm turning up to work, something's in front of me, I've got a device. It may or may not work properly. It probably isn't very configurable. That was people's expectations of managed devices in business for years and years and years. And that's really shifted with all the sort of the good technologies coming in, like you say, I have a completely integrated Apple ecosystem, or I've got different applications that go and talk to each other. That's increased people's experience of personal IT, of personal technology. And that's really come across into their expectations in the business environment as well. So if we think about, what does a user expect? I want to be able to open my laptop. I want it to work. I want to be able to access my applications, access my data. We have this sort of underlying principle of the modern workplace, which is I should be able to work from anywhere, at any time, from any device, and be able to do that in a really secure fashion. And the technologies that need to underpin that, things like effective device management that doesn't rely on that device being located in a single space, things like cloud-based applications, which allow me to go and access my data, access those different tools, those different services, not just from an office location or not just through a virtual desktop, but from my phone, if that's sensible to do so, from my work device, if that's a good use case, being able to do that on different networks. The whole sort of driving force behind this modern IT strategy has really focused on that increased flexibility around how users want to work, where they work, what devices they're working from. Yeah, flexibility would probably be the one word answer.
Yeah. So, with mobility and security at the heart of that, yeah, and from a user experience point of view, I think lower complexity, so more simplicity, no window within window, no computer within computer, just a case of opening up that laptop and operating, and then having almost the iPhone experience of if that laptop goes kaput, then it's quite easy for that laptop to be replaced, and you log in, and all of your required data and applications are there in front of you. Is that a fair reflection of what the user experience would be like?
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely.
Josh, that's for you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% the experience that we're aiming for. And it's been available to people in lots of different industries for quite a while now. Um, and we get different enhancements, every single month there's new drops of different features, different technologies, different changes. But the underlying principle has been around for a while. And we're just getting to the point now where with these more regulated industries, we can put the trust in and we can say, yeah, like we're ticking the right security boxes, we're doing things in the right way to be able to open that up to everybody. We've addressed those concerns.
Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head there because this has been available to lots of other industries. In legal, we're going to go on to talk about obviously the impact of the case and practice management strategy having on this embracing of more modern working. But that's where you're at. To bring her up to date where you're at now, David. That's your experience for your users now. So you're operating within a firm, as I say, circa 100 employees or so, and that's the user experience that they're having. So open up their laptop and off they go. So what's it like to kind of work in a firm where that is the user experience, and what's the feedback from users?
Yeah, it's been really positive feedback, to be honest, because obviously we did a migration journey as well from a legacy kind of platform, across to this sort of more modern workspace, and it's been sort of night and day really in terms of the experience for users. I think it's just so much simpler, simpler from us managing it and simpler from users just actually getting on board with things. Keeping in some ways keeping finance a bit happy. It's a lot easier for us to kind of almost cost out, applications because now we're just doing it on like a per user, per app kind of basis. We're not having to kind of build into, as Josh touched on, kind of looking at the resources of VDI and then suddenly thinking we're going to need more resources here. It's going to cost us a lot more money to kind of because we've got this series of users now complaining about things. So that kind of really does help. And actually, what's interesting, I think, probably from a user's perspective is that because they're now using apps that are more, I suppose, more familiar to almost how you'd use apps personally, for instance, in your personal world. What that then leads to is actually more curiosity from users, more, oh, like, oh, could we do this? Could we start doing, these sorts of changes or implement these sorts of things? Because now they feel like we're not dealing with like a real IT kind of platform, a really techie platform where only a small number of people can operate it or manage it or make modifications to it. They see a web-based application, they think, well, we could probably change this. We could tweak that. So it's kind of unlocking, I think, a lot more possibilities and a lot more, as I say, curiosity, I think, in users. And yeah, so it's certainly refreshing to kind of have users, talk to you and come and speak to you and say, do you think we could do this, and things like that.
And from your point of view as the CTO, has it accelerated that evolution, that change from being the technical guy to being maybe the transformation guy, where you're rather than trying to fix things and dealing with incidents, oh, Citrix has got issues again, to be how can we be innovative? How can we move things forward?
Completely, yeah. And I think yeah, so I mean, we've got, I'll have, partners coming to me saying, oh, do you reckon we could, I mean, talking about integrations and things like that, do you reckon we could integrate like this? Do you reckon we could have this platform do things like this? And they were just conversations that just wouldn't have happened, in the past because, everyone just kind of lived in that bubble and that world of this is the IT kit that I just use my PMS and I just do these very basic things. We won't think outside the box, but now it's completely different. Yeah, and I think it's just unlocked everybody's mindsets really to think of, I'm sure there must be a way, to do this. And then that's what we try and look to achieve, really. Admittedly, that does come with its own challenges as well, because then obviously you're getting a lot more requests to do things and to kind of change things, to innovate. So it's almost like it's a different problem then that you've got, but actually it's a better problem to have because actually all of the things that you're then doing is, as you say, you're not fixing things now. You're not kind of just keeping things going. You're actually everything that you can do and change, you're now kind of, it takes the business forward.
Yeah, yeah, not bogged down with issues. You're dealing with things that are going to move things forward. So, from a technical point of view, Josh, what is the technology that's underpinning this evolution? So, talk us through what's happening in Microsoft roadmap, and David will be utilizing this technology. Is his firm utilizing to be able to facilitate this modern user experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So um, I'm gonna talk sort of purely from a Microsoft perspective for a minute, but the same sort of principles are kind of relevant to any technology stack. There's three sort of really key areas that we care about. We care about our identity. So the thing that we're using to go and log into those different applications, to access the data, the different permissions that we have. And within Microsoft, that's called Entra ID. Um, and that goes all the way to managing, making sure we use multi-factor authentication to get into things when we need that, making sure that the right people have access to the right resources, only on the right devices, on the right networks at the right time. So we sort of start with that identity management piece. And that's where one of the biggest shifts is. We used to sort of look at the network, that on-premise network, we'd put a firewall on top of it. That would be our security perimeter. And that's the thing we've really had to shift away from to enable this modern workplace. And identity is the thing that's come and replaced that. Identity's become that control that says exactly, who has access. If I'm not in the network, that used to be the control. Now I can work from anywhere. I can work from any device, from any network. Identity replaces the network as that perimeter control. So we've got identity. We've got our device management. So again, by not having all of my devices on that one lovely trusted network, my users could be working from home, they could be working from coffee shops, they could be, on public untrusted networks. So we need to make sure that the devices that they're walking around with are secured. And Intune is the technology within Microsoft that helps us do that. So Intune is all around making sure that people have access to a managed device, that device has the right configuration, the right settings, the right applications deployed, the things that make that device secure. And then finally, we have the data. So people have access to their documents, their files. Um, and in this modern workplace environment, we don't have as much control over somebody, accidentally sending a file to somebody. We're increasing the collaboration, we're increasing the amount that people are communicating. And we want to make sure that we're protecting that data. So making sure that, if something's confidential and should only be accessed by certain people, that we've got controls in place that are doing that. We're encrypting that data. We're preventing it from being accidentally shared. And within the Microsoft environment, we've got Purview, which is the tool that goes and does all of our data governance, all our data security, the data management. So it's a huge shift from that sort of, that starting point of on-prem, that sort of transition into VDI, and then we've got, three really key technologies there that are underpinning that modern workplace experience with identity, device management, data governance.
And by facilitating that, if we think about virtual desktop, obviously virtual desktop is a way of delivering application, delivering access to that hosted environment. What we also are able to do is get rid of some of that, a lot of that back end hosted environment. So, we're talking about Entra Josh, so that facilitates the removal of legacy domain controllers. So the cost of hosting them, the cost of maintaining them. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And domain controllers is a great example of, a tier one security thing. They're setting that, every organization needs to protect. They need to be made, they're heavily patched, they're sort of painful to manage, they're a single point of failure if one goes down. Users then can't authenticate to any of the applications, any of their desktops. So being able to move away from that, absolutely, there's the security benefit, there's that sort of maintenance benefit, the cost benefit of not needing to run those servers. But yeah, absolutely, it reduces that reliance on on-premise infrastructure.
As always, in every webinar session that I run, I always forget to point out that you can ask questions. So yeah, please feel free to ask questions, and we'll pick some out. If we don't get to those questions, then we can follow them up off the webinar. But yeah, so is that reflective of your environment, David? So that's you've embraced. Where are you on your journey? You've certainly obviously embraced Intune and Entra, and then where have you got to from a Purview point of view? Is that something that you're undertaking now, or already on that journey?
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously we obviously have a separate and again web-based sort of document management system as well. So actually we utilize some of the data loss protection kind of features in that as well. So obviously with Purview, obviously you're protecting your Microsoft environment, your Exchange servers and your SharePoints and OneDrives and all of that. But obviously we then have a separate document management system that we also need to protect as well. So yeah, we're very much that's what we live and breathe really every day, to be honest with you, from our environment. And it's just a lot nicer place to be. Admittedly, you've got to keep up with Microsoft and their changes that they kind of, they introduce because they are introducing changes at a fairly rapid sort of pace. But that's good. It certainly keeps you on your toes. But and again, when we're looking at platforms, so whether it be document management system or case management system, practice management systems, all of those, or any other web-based platform, the key things that we're looking for is, what is the user experience going to be like when they're logging into these applications? So what we will be looking for is, has it got single sign-on? That's key for us because then we can integrate that obviously into 365 just to make sure that people don't have to use a username and password to access whatever platform it is. So that's really, really key for us. It's so we will very much, vet and look at our apps and applications that we want to bring on board and say, well, how well is this going to work in our ecosystem? Because we've got everything so seamlessly working. We don't want to, we don't want to introduce barriers to users that they're not used to kind of experiencing.
That's exactly where I want to go next. That legal software strategy in the fact that um, we've painted a fantastic picture of this great new user experience, a lot more simplicity, a lot, a better performance. You're leveraging the power of the laptop in front of you rather than trying to leverage a hosted desktop. But all this is only possible really to the level that we're the picture that we're painting, the level that's possible if you join your legal software application strategy with your Microsoft software application strategy. So, can we talk a little bit about your landscape? So, previously in your previous firm, and also within this firm, you talked about going through a migration from a legacy PMS to a more modern PMS. So, the landscape of your applications are primarily browser based, are they?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're browser based, and obviously, but we utilize then, sort of the Office suite, as it were. So, your Outlooks and Words and PowerPoints and all of that. But yeah, so everything for us is browser based. And obviously, what's important that you do around that is that you have some offline features or offline capabilities as well. So you build resilience into whatever you're doing. So document management system is a classic one. So if somebody checks out a document on the document management system, and let's say they lose internet connectivity, maybe they're working from home and their Wi-Fi connection isn't great. You want to ensure that, your applications, they can continue working on that document. And when the internet kind of comes back, back to them and they save the document, it will then save and kind of check back into the document management system. So there's a lot of resiliency that you kind of do around these applications and things like that, just so that people have that kind of seamless experience and you don't have to necessarily worry about, oh, I've lost internet connectivity. That means I can't work on this document that I'm kind of, utilizing. Obviously there's, if you do lose internet connectivity, yes, you may have some issue potentially accessing, like a web-based platform, whatever that might be. But then the reality is it just your internet connectivity? Can you hotspot from your phone? If you had that issue anyway, you wouldn't be able to connect to a VDI environment anyway. So it's all kind of swings and roundabouts when it comes to that type of thing, really.
And some of the legacy software that's been somewhat holding law firms back and
Yeah.
keeping them needing to reside within that virtual environment. Yeah, are put within practice management systems, dictation systems, even print solutions. These are the kind of products. Probate software. Some of these buckets are have been filled with products that have needed to be hosted and needed to be delivered by a virtual desktop. There's now a new breed of products that are browser based or web based. Do you feel that the law firm has had to make any compromises in terms of embracing these browser-based products? Not that that's necessarily a negative thing, because from my point of view, I want to see law firms look holistically at their overall strategy, and maybe they have to make a slight compromise on a bit of functionality on a product, but if it reduces their cost of virtual desktop and frees their users from having deal with all this complexity, then it may well regularly be a positive thing. But do you feel that the law firm has made any compromises by moving to these more modern browser-based products?
I think I think whatever software you use, whether it's, sort of the traditional kind of legacy platforms or the web browser-based sort of platforms, I think there's always a compromise of some sorts because unless you're going to develop, the application or the platform yourself, internally, and you're going to get it exactly how you want it, doing exactly what you want, which comes with its own risks and its own problems in itself. I think there's always good, there's never that one size, fits all in terms of this will do exactly what we want it to do in exactly the way we want it to do it. And I think that's something that every firm just has to get their heads around. And then what you're then needing to do is really just look at, okay, what's our actual business critical things that we need to be able to address, that we need to be able to cover off. And can we do those, currently? Can we do those on a new platform? If there is a compromise, what will that affect? And it's also a case of what does the roadmap look like as well, for these platforms. So if we stay as we are, we stay on the legacy kind of pathway, what does that look like in a year, 2 years, 3 years time for us? That will we change the way we work, and things like that. So there is always an element of compromise with anything that you do, without a doubt. But it's just weighing up the pros and cons and kind of going through all of that. And maybe the best thing, to kind of do that is to probably just work through some little mini workflows almost of your business critical, things that you do really, and just analyze them and say, right, this is how we're doing it now. If we were to change, could we still do that? Um, and is there a benefit to us changing? If we stay as we are, is there risks attached to that by staying as we are, just doing things as we always have done? Because actually, maybe there is not going to be any future development in this platform or whatever we're kind of currently using. So it's the same principles apply to anything really. You just got to weigh up those pros and cons.
I'm conscious of time. Already 5 minutes over what I said would be the limit of the webinar, and we've just got another question to go as usual. But just discuss that a little minute for a little minute. Yeah, there may well be compromises on the say on the product that you use, but also what you need to factor into it is what's their API strategy. Are those compromises going to be fulfilled by a specialist tool that you can integrate into it? So certainly think holistically. We've dealt with. I mean, you guys use Action Step as your PMS. We're an Action Step partner. I urge people to think in a joined up manner because we've worked with providers, clients recently that have moved to Action Step, but before they've engaged with us, they've just signed up to a 3-year virtual desktop contract because there's this other piece of legacy software that needs hosting. Whereas surely a better decision would be to assess that legacy bit of software. Can it be replaced with a browser-based alternative, suddenly saving you money and revolutionizing your IT user experience? So this is the thing about not making decisions in isolation. Try and make them, holistically across all of your landscape. Okay, to kind of move forward. So what we've done, we've talked about the fact that why did the virtual desktop move happen in the first place? Very much a positive things for law firms, but what it actually started to bring as time went on are some challenges that weren't ideal for the law firm or the users. We've talked about what a modern alternative can look like. Josh did a great job of explaining. It's just a case of plug and play in terms of opening up your laptop and off you go, and having that modern experience of utilizing applications in an unfragmented way, if that's a term. And then we've talked about, well, what's the technology that underpins this, and the way that your legal software strategy is actually the key to unlocking a lot of this goodness. To kind of to look forward, Josh. For law firms that are on this session, maybe feeling that they're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of how do they move forward. Maybe they're just starting to look into what their legal application strategy could be to be able to facilitate other decisions, or maybe they're at the point where they're trying to understand whether how they can create the conditions to be able to move away from virtual desktop long term. What should be the starting point in terms of what should they start embracing from the Microsoft roadmap?
Absolutely. So I think identity is the key to everything. It's the how do I access my devices? It's the how do I access my applications? Um, so the sort of the best starting point for adopting any sort of modern technology strategy is to really think about that identity piece. It's the hardest one to unpick if you don't get it right at the start. So you don't want to sort of start down a journey of adopting lots of these different cloud or browser-based applications, each with their own identity platform, their own usernames, their own passwords. So then get to a point in the future where you want to make that simple experience, where you want single sign-on into each of those apps. You want, that common sign-in experience. And to have to unpick that, that's a real challenge. So looking at Entra ID, looking at conditional access, looking at replacing those domain controllers, and really starting to get that identity strategy in place, that's the sort of the perfect starting point for any organization.
And for yourself, David, a lot of law firms that will be on this session won't have a CTO in place at all, let alone one as superb as yourself. So for those kind of law firm leaders that are maybe trying to, join up a tech strategy for the good of their firm, where should they start? What should they start? And it doesn't have to necessarily be a technical answer. What's the starting point in kind of creating a joined up strategy?
I mean, I suppose you look, you've got to look at what's your current infrastructure, what have you got in place at the moment, and how long is the shelf life left on that? Because like me in a previous life, my previous firm, we had a natural shelf life for that kit, and that kit was reaching an age, and then you reach that crossroads and that junction. So if you find yourself you're heading towards that potential crossroads and that potential junction that you're going to be at, now's the time to start really evaluating, okay, what direction can we kind of go in with this? Do we want to just rinse and repeat what we've always done? Or is now the opportunity for us to kind of to start looking at maybe more modern applications? Or maybe it's the applications that they use already, but actually they offer them in a different flavor, a different way and things like that. So it's really evaluating everything about it because if you're if you are a decent software vendor and that you are looking at more modern experiences and more, moving people off of these legacy kind of platforms and things like that. So you've absolutely got to be looking at what you currently got, because ultimately you're not going to be able to go to your finance director and things like that and say, look, I need X number of £1,000 or whatever to roll this out if they've just spent a load of money on new kit. It's just not going to happen. So you've got to try and, balance that out as a business and be very commercial about it as well. And then I think the flip side to that is then probably then just looking at, okay, if we have an opportunity where we can move, we're approaching those crossroads, and then you start to identify maybe some software applications, some things that you think could work, then it's a case of, okay, well, what are the compromises of us using those? What are the benefits? And as I said, start mapping out maybe some of your business critical processes that you absolutely have to do and fulfill to keep the business kind of running. And then you can then map those to, the new platforms, and then it's then just working out the pros and cons kind of from there, because I'd like to think that, the pros will outweigh the cons, provided that, they don't impact on business sort of critical pathways.
Yeah, super. I mean, from my point of view, it's never too early to start thinking about these things.
No.
We migrate law firms to other practice management systems. Action Step is our primary landing zone for the majority of law firms. The average gestation time is probably 12 months from having conversations to signing off, and even then, work is always continued, but hands-on 6 to 8 months of real work in kind of moving firms. So, you've got less time than you think. And then the earlier you start, even before that, you want to try and make sure that contracts align with each other, that you're not wasting money with applications or agreements that maybe don't serve your purpose post migration to a more of a modern way of working. So yeah, it's never too early to start thinking about these things and join these things together. Yeah, so superb. Yeah, of course we ran over, but yeah, thanks so much for your time, guys. I'm hoping that we've taken people on a real journey there, and even the most technophobic law firm leader will be able to understand, what that journey looks like and the benefits that it can give. So thanks, Josh, and thanks, David. Looking forward in terms of what's up next on the webinar series. So our next session is. So once again, this is a 7-part series discussing the legal modern workplace, going through those key technical segments and talking about what that journey looks like and the benefit to the firm. So please have a look at that series. We also have a white paper out that discusses this. And then on the next session, we're actually looking a little bit more outwardly. So we've got a fantastic guest from Third For, the AML provider, and also a superb service thinking transformational coordinator within Thornton's, that fantastic law firm in Scotland. And we're going to be looking at how the client journey can be affected by the technical choices that we make around that modern workplace. How do we make sure that we optimize operational efficiency, but also try and give the best possible digital journey to our clients that we can. So check that out. That's after Easter. And I think that's about it, unless there's another slide that's going to pop up. Oh, there we go. There's the white paper. So visit the insights page of our website, and we try and detail this and give some help and advice as to what those key pillars are to this legal modern workplace experience, and the steps that can be taken. Awesome. Thanks for sticking with us. We've run over by 14 minutes, but it was hopefully all good stuff. So thanks, everyone, and hopefully see you on the next session. Cheers, guys. Thanks, David. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.